Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. If you have not already, we have some source sheets that are way too long, but we're not going through them in depth. I promise you that. We also have machzorim in the back there, so you can start counting how many pages we're going to do on the services and start counting down towards lunch. Not for Yom Kippur, I'm sorry, but for Rosh Hashanah at least. And we're going to have a little fun here tonight. Yeah, I did the Yossi double tap. I made sure. Yeah. So welcome everyone to this third in our series of learnings towards the high holidays. My name is Rabbi Avi Kushlan, for those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. So I can't see him back there. And tonight we're going to talk about who is the God of the high holidays. But I was told that there is an important minchag when it comes to these lectures now, which is we have to start with a joke. Is that still true? So one day after services, the rabbi walks out into the hallway, sees a little boy standing there, staring at a big plaque on the wall. The plaque has names all over it, and has decorated some American flags. The rabbi says, "Good day, David. How are you doing today?" "Good day, Rabbi. What's this?" The rabbi says, "Well, that's the names of everyone from the community that died in the service." And the boy takes a deep breath, trembles. "Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur?" Old joke, old standby, what can I say? But I love it so much. So here's the problem with tonight's shiur. Who is the God of the high holidays? It presumes one major thing, which is what? That there is a God, that you know who God is the rest of the time, right? So here's the big fun thing we're going to do right now, which is I'm going to ask you to find a partner in the room to kibitz with for a couple minutes here, and I want you to see if you can have some conception of what God means to you, okay? I'm not asking for a formal PhD thesis about what God is, who God is, where God lives, that kind of thing. If you could encapsulate some sense of what God means in your life, that's what I'm going to look for now. It's probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you all night, okay? But I just want you to take a couple minutes to take the partner here, talk for just a minute here. Sorry if you're online, you're going to be talking to yourself, but that promises to be great. It's probably a great conversation. No one's going to disagree with you, okay? And just take a minute here, just have that conversation. Think about what does God mean? Try to verbalize what that means to you. So you guys, one more minute here, and then I'm going to ask for some answers. Lonnie, want to use the microphone? Yeah, might as well. We can try it, see how it goes. I feel like on a cruise ship when there's an announcement, they have those 3 bells that chime. Do, do, do. Shouldn't you do something? Die, 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 die. All right, I'm going to ask everyone to wrap up those conversations. Alon's going to come around with the microphone. And if there's any brave souls here who feel like they can offer a couple sentences of summation of what the whole creator of the universe, creator of the world, source of life, giver of everything, that's just a small thing right there, right? Some summation of what those might mean to you. She has the microphone.
I think for me, it guides me right from wrong, good from bad in everyday life. And I think so many people don't, but for me, that I think about it.
Yeah. So God is kind of that morality compass in your life on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
That says, here's am I doing things the right way, am I doing things the wrong way?
Yes.
And that's the kind of the force for you that says, how can I feel if this is into it, if this is good, or if this is bad?
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, please.
I think for me, a lot of what God is how we treat each other and how our actions are one of the expressions of God, like on a day-to-day basis.
So very, very kind of Schulweisian, right? The idea of bringing godliness into the world. God is the predicate. We are the drivers of bringing the force of God, the goodness of God, the love of God, all those. I might be putting words in your mouth there a little bit, but I think it's okay. We are the conduits of bringing God into the world, and that's the way you exist with God in this world. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I see a couple more hands here.
First, I am very surprised that why today, which is about even half of last week, this subject.
We're just talking about the question about God.
Yes, I will. In my opinion, what I have perceived from the book is what Moses perceived from communicating with God. I emphasize communication, and please pay attention to the very precise wording. I say communication, which I mean more visual, not audio, not verbal. In other words, I want to say that Moses had a graphic memory. That's what God showed him. He grasped, retained, and revealed.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Anyone else that feels brave enough to take the microphone?
Well, I think the most important thing in Judaism is that we're smart enough to know that there is no God on earth, that there's no God living amongst us, there's no God on earth, there's no God that's going to tell us what to do, and no God that's going to take over the world. God is in heaven, if there is a God. We know one thing, he's not on earth, he's in heaven, and if there is one, I believe in godliness. And if there's a God, what does he expect of me, and what do I expect of God? There may not be one, but I live as if there is one.
So I'm going to challenge that one bit. You're saying there's no God on earth, then why do we have a temple? We built a temple as a dwelling place for God. Mishkan literally means dwelling, right? Mm-hmm. So there is some concept, we say we know this, right? There is a concept in our tradition that says there's some sense of godliness or aspect of God that dwells amongst us.
It's in our body. We all have, part of God is in our body. Our conscience is God.
No, that's beautiful. That's truly beautiful to say we have that spark of God inside of us. But we have to contend with our tradition, which does say that there is not just, a dwelling of God in heaven, but also on earth, right? If you look at, like the Elenu, right? Shema Shemaim B'aretz, right? This is God in heaven and on earth, above and below. So yeah, we have a concept of that for sure. Uh-oh, we have to get challenged here from the back of the room.
Well, no, but where does God dwell on earth? He says it's in, which Schulweis's philosophy. It's within everybody. Everybody's got a spark of the divine, and we have to be godliness. But you sound like you're a little more literal. So can you explain if you were a little more literal?
No, I mean, read the book.
I understand. So you're saying people who think that there may or may not be a God, but let's say they say, for argument's sake, there is no God as an entity, which is, I believe, is what Schulweis believed, but I can't prove that.
I'm not putting words in Joyce's mouth, that's for sure.
Yeah,
She
but
came last week for Weinstein.
well, Mordechai Kaplan did that. He believed that there is no entity called God, that God is what we do on earth, which really doesn't matter. If there is one and you do godly things, geh gesinnt. You know, Yiddish, go in good health. And if there isn't, then you still do good deeds on earth. So it doesn't really matter. But I'm just saying that's the difference.
Yeah.
Right? So you're saying God is an entity on earth?
I'm saying in our tradition,
Yeah.
there is a thread you can follow which would say that there is some sense of God dwelling on earth.
And how does that manifest itself?
Well, so you could say spirituality, that's one option right there, right? You could say it is the piece inside all of us that is carrying a spark of God. It can be very literal in that sense or metaphorical in that sense. You could also say the idea of the Shekhinah, right? As I mentioned, we had the Mishkan, right, which is the dwelling.
Right.
One of the names we use for God is Shekhinah, right? One who basically the concept of dwelling, right?
Right.
So we say when 10 people come together to pray in a minyan, the Shekhinah descends upon them. When someone is sick in bed, the Shekhinah is sitting at their bedside with them. We have all these, someone's in mourning, the Shekhinah is sitting there with them, consoling them.
You know, I've gone to conservative services for a long time. I'm an old guy. They never talk about that.
We should talk about that.
That's never talked
By the way, you know
about.
we don't talk about that? Because by the way,
No.
You know why people don't talk about this? God is scary. God is an incredibly scary topic to talk about, right? Both in the literal sense of what does God mean in our tradition, but also you have to ask yourself, do I believe in God? Is there a God? Does God exist? These are all things we have to contend with. God is scary. It's easier to avoid the scary topic than to engage in it. But this is not my lecture tonight, so I want to get off this point for a second. Yeah. But anyway, the point is, I want to say we all have different conceptions there, right? But I want to ask one more question as a follow-up to that, which we're not going to do Harut to time, but just answer if we can. Where do we get these concepts of God from? Where did you learn these things about God being a spark, or God being not on here on earth, or things like you kind of mentioned, Jay, right? How going to a conservative shul for all your life, you didn't talk about the Shekhinah, you didn't talk about these things.
Not in the conservative temple. I'll bring this up. I was thinking about bringing it up anyway, to put you on the spot. I went to
Every Saturday night. By the way, if you come to Saturday evening minyan, you'll get nothing but this for like half an hour. Well, that's a different topic. I don't want to talk about that right now.
Okay, I learned. I went to conservative Hebrew schools, like synagogue like this.
Yeah.
Never talked about that. Never. Now, this is in the 50s and 60s. Never talked. But when I went to Esha Torah, which is sort of like a Chabad kind of place, people don't know it. When I was a young adult, that's all they talked about, what you just said, which is all from Jewish tradition, that God is in your presence in a variety of places. So the interesting thing I'm going to finish with, and I'll shut up, is it's one of the reasons the conservative movement dropped spirituality, dropped life after death, which if you read the English on the Amida, which I do every week when I'm here, it says 3 or 4 times on the first page, God gives life to those who are in the dust, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's Judaism. Most modern people in the conservative movement and the Reform don't know that. That's all.
So answer my question one way there, which is saying you learned it from school and from Asia or other sources, right? But the question is like, where do we learn these concepts of what God means to us from? I'm asking, where did you guys learn this? Is it from school? Is it from sitting in synagogue? Is it from reading the books? Where did you guys learn these things? This is a genuine question. Rabbis?
Conversations with other people.
Conversations?
So I went to Hebrew school here
Yeah.
at a conservative synagogue, and I distinctly remember having conversations like that with Rabbi Feinstein in the classroom. Is God real? What is God? What do you
Yeah.
believe about God? Oh, you don't think that, you don't believe in God? That's okay. God can be however you believe God to be. Those were conversations that we had on
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So we'll just sit back there. Sorry, I forgot. Like, I'm at the microphone and everyone can hear me, but now everyone can hear people without the microphone. Sorry about that, Lauren. It was this concept of when you came to Hebrew school here at Vadas Shalom, right? Someone like Rabbi Feinstein would sit down with you and ask these tough questions. Who is God? What is God? How do you relate to God? Is God real? Is God just? Is God nice? Is God, welcoming? I'm sure all these different permutations of those questions, right? To kind of really try to drill down to that. But the answer kind of a lot of you shared is from teachers, from rabbis, this is kind of what you've been told over time. Because the truth is, what's in here, the Torah, if you can't tell back there, right? And what's in a book like this, which I'm going to ask you to open up in a second here, is very different. And what's the intermediate force there? Is the rabbis. They had to conceptualize a whole concept of how to bring God to the people in a way that didn't exist if you don't actually have God hovering over you on a mountain. Okay? So I'd like, if you can, to turn to your book. We're on page 84 for just a moment here, if we may.
So, Rabbi, can I have one more thing?
You may add anything, yes.
No one mentioned their parents. That's where I learned, not from my parents, not from rabbis.
So the reason it's interesting, from parents is interesting, because the parsha coming up this week is Ki Teitzei, which features the stubborn and rebellious child, Ben Sorer Moreh, the one who, when he doesn't listen to his parents' voice, it says, should be taken out to the elders of the city, and they stone the child, put him to death, right? We don't do that anymore, by the way, just so people know. I'm not recommending this as child punishment for anybody, please. But there is some concept there of if people don't listen to their parents, right, you get the elders together to teach the kids something about what it means to live a life, right? So parents are one force that's very powerful. Inside the home is probably the most powerful Jewish source of all. You spend way more hours there than you do inside a building like this, clearly, right? And yet, it's often kind of offloaded, those questions, to somebody who says, like, if I don't know how to answer it myself because I'm not confident or I don't have an answer, that's why you have rabbis, that's why we have teachers, that's why we have a school system. But parents, I think, are probably far the most important instilling force as far as deriving that personal identity. Because you're constantly there in the house, right, for years and years and years. You're not here so much, just a few hours a day. All right, so we're on page 84. Yes. Short.
2 points. When I want to make a kid from doing something, I try to scare it. God is scary. No, God is loving.
Right.
If you are sinful, you are afraid of God, and it is faithful. Apart from that, I learned God not from my father, not from rabbis. I learned through study of his nature.
Good. Well, that's what we're going to do tonight. So that's good. That's good just right here. So, as everyone open to page 84 so far. So these are the morning blessings. These are said every day, not just on the high holidays. They're in every single siddur you're ever going to see. It's called Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings. And by the way, the translation here is, as usual with these things, absolutely terrible. I'm sorry. It's intended to be poetic. It's intended to be moving and meaningful. And yet it completely blows out the actual meaning of these things, right? So obviously every blessing starts the same way. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, God, our Lord, the Lord our God, King of the universe. And then it goes on to say something that God does, which, by the way, is giving a definition of who God is in that sense, right? So it's saying this is a God who creates the difference between day and night. It gives me the ability to understand between day and night because God creates day and night. It's saying very basic creation here. The God who makes me in his image. The God as creation force, right? The God as parent in a sense there as well. We're getting into that in more detail later. The God who made me free, gave me free will, instilled in me a soul to choose the things that I do. Here it says giving us freedom. That's very minimal notion for what it actually says in here. That made us a Jew so we can fulfill the mitzvot. That opens my eyes, that gives me clothing when I'm naked, that frees me from my oppression. These are all names of God that the rabbi said, if I could distill everything that God does for us in this book and just start your day with a message that says, what is the full encompassing nature of who God is and what God does for us? That's what this page right here does for us. It's one of the very, very first things we say. If you've ever joined our minyan here in the morning, you've heard me say, we're in the Redis Siddur Sim Shalom. We start on page 6 with Birkot HaShachar. Please rise if you're able to. Every single day we start with the same thing, which is, who the heck are we here for? We're here for ourselves, to give ourselves some kind of intention for the day, to set something, but also we're here to say, who is God? Who's given us this religion? Who's given us this ability to come together as a community? We start very much with that right there. But now I want to go back a little bit. You have some papers in front of you. It's called this little source sheet here. This, by the way, is incredibly long. I promise we're not going to go through the whole thing. If you don't have one in front of you, Alana has extras over here. Make sure everyone has it in front of you. Yes, we're good? Okay. If you're online, I'm sorry. I don't have a better answer for you than that. I'll do that next one for that next week, a couple weeks from now. Man, we're getting close. 3 weeks, right? 3 weeks, less than that. So I want to start mostly with Devarim, because Devarim, of course, the book of Deuteronomy, the grand retelling of the whole story. Moses does an amazing job of summing everything up to a certain extent, right? So he says, you are the children of your God. That's the very first source on the very first page there. This is, again, God as parent, right? We see God as father, God as parent. It goes on further, right? Is not this the Father who created you, fashioned you, made you endure? By the way, if I've ever threatened my kids every now and then, I quote this line to them: I was the one that made you. I'm the reason you're still alive in this world. That's actually more their mother than me, which, by the way, tonight is my 8th wedding anniversary. And I'm celebrating with you people, so you should be great. No, just kidding. We had a lovely breakfast this morning as the kids were climbing all over us and screaming in our ears, as happens after several years of marriage. And then again, we have the God punishing. Bear in mind that your God, Adonai, disciplines you just as a man disciplines his son. So again, this is the same idea of God as parent we just saw, right? But it's the other side of the coin, right? God loves you and cares for you, but what do parents do? They raise functioning adults. How do you raise functioning adults? You teach them the moral compass of right from wrong, right? This is bringing godliness into the world, is teaching your kids right from wrong, what to do, what not to do, okay? So you have to have God as parent in the fullest sense of the term. We say God is love, right? And that is very true, but love doesn't always just mean here's candy, here's a puppy dog. Love can mean several different things there as well, at least in the understanding of our tradition as well here. If that's not your personal understanding, I agree with that as well. I'm not trying to indoctrinate you to what this says here, right? And yet, this is our tradition, this is our text, we have to understand this and grapple with this. But then we have also a different kind of metaphor for God here as well. This is not even talking about something like Shir HaShirim. Does anyone know what Shir HaShirim is? It's what's in English? Solomon's Song? Song of Songs. Song of Songs. It's also called Solomon's Song sometimes. I don't know. Written by Solomon, right? It's a giant erotic poem that we read during Passover that says, it's very, very literal in its eroticism. And the rabbi said, oh, no, we can't do that. Somehow it snuck into our canon magically and became a metaphor, right? God loves Israel, Israel loves God, we're lovers, we're husband and wife, all these different kind of things in there, right? That's way off on one side of it. But even here we see a concept of, right, it is not because you are the most numerous of peoples that God grew attached to you and chose you. You're a small, insignificant people. That's still true today. We're what, 0.02% of the world's population? Hopefully growing, but I think maybe shrinking at this time. Everyone else has a higher birth rate than we do, it feels like. But because God favored you, this sense of like God has some kind of special love for you, special connection to you. Just that little innate je ne sais quoi, to quote the French, right? There's something that God sees in you that's special, and that's different than just being a parent, right? That's just saying there's some recognition of that special relationship there. We may turn the page. Same thing here, again, even more explicit, right? It was to your ancestors. This is Deuteronomy 10:15. It should be the top one on the second page there. If it's not, I made a mistake, and correct me. Hopefully everyone has the right sheets in front of them. It was to your ancestors that God was drawn out of love for them. So that, I love this word, so that you, their lineal descendants, were chosen from among all peoples, as is now the case. We were chosen out of love. God is our lover. There's a very real statement to that. We talk about this, we use different terms. We use it in our liturgy as well. On Friday night, we welcome in the Sabbath bride, right? All of our liturgy is all about love and relationships and that special bond that we have together. But, God is a jealous lover. Deuteronomy 6:14-15, do not follow other gods, any gods the peoples are about you, for your God, Adonai, in your midst, is an impassioned God, lest the anger of your God blaze forth against you, wiping you off the face of the earth. This is the jealous God, the God that has that sense of insecurity in some sense here. Like, what's going on there? Why can we have a special relationship and yet God has this need to be loved by us and to be only treated well by us? It's a very interesting kind of image of God there. And it's also a very, very, I can't think of the word, almost anthropomorphizing. Did I get that word right? I always get that wrong. Image of God too, with the same kind of emotions and feelings that we have. Of course, we are created in the image of God. We should feel these things too, right? So naturally, God should feel these things as well. But then, I want to pause there for a second and take a turn here. Because this is probably one of the most famous things that we're going to hear during the high holidays, the explication of who God really is for us, all summarized in the 13 attributes of God. When we take out the Torah, you'll know the tune when you hear it, right? Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. It sounds much, much better when Jackie and Phil are doing it, but that's my little quick impression tonight. That's why I stopped short there. God, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. And that's where the rabbis cut off the verse. They don't have the part of the verse right after this, which says, by the way, even to the 3rd and 4th generations, God's going to punish you for your transgressions, just so you know. Never forgets, like an elephant, right? But they say that's not really who God is. That's just something God had to warn Moses about. But truly, God's essence is encompassed in this part of the verse, which is where we cut it off right there. And so we have this idea of God now as parent. We have this idea of God as lover, God as this emotional power of jealousy and anger and rage, and above all else, this idea that God is compassionate, gracious, forgiving, loving, caring, tender. This is the God that we're supposed to approach on the high holidays now. And that was only the start of our lecture. So wait, if I just got to you and said, this is the God of the high holidays, what the heck are we now going to talk about now? Because clearly, we just answered the question, right? Oh wait, there's more. I'll throw in a set of steak knives, you stayed at the end of the conversation. We now turn to our attention more to what it means to be in Rosh Hashanah, to be in this season, to be in this moment. And I want to look at our next source on our sheet here. It is from the Talmud. It's incredibly long here, so I'm going to summarize it for you. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I promise. You should see Rosh Hashanah 16a, 14 to 15 on one page, and it probably goes on to the next page on your sheet. You have a long paragraph there. Again, I never trust printers. I know technology is good. I know we rely on it a lot. I never trust any of it. I always make sure I double check everything there. So we come through all the holidays here, and why should we have all these holidays? Why do we have Passover to bring till we start the counting of the grain for the Omer? Because the field should be blessed. So we dedicate the blessing of the fields to the holiday, right? That makes sense. We have a holiday because of the time of the grain, so the fields should be blessed. We on Shavuot, bring 2 loaves of new wheat because we started growing it on Passover. We count the Omer, the measure of the wheat, until we get to Shavuot. We bring the product of that wheat. We bring the bread to the temple. And of course, it's saying, bring me so that all the fruits of your year will be blessed. That's why we have that holiday. And why does it say during Sukkot in the fall we have the water libation festival? By the way, if you've never heard of the water libation festival that happened in the Torah, in the temple back in the day, hopefully I'll get to teach it to you during Sukkot this year at some point. They had clowns and jugglers and acrobats, and they were having water fights in the temple every year to celebrate the water in the fall. Alana, you'll be like you're concerned. We're not going to do that here, I promise. We won't, maybe a dunk tank for the rabbis if it's still hot out, okay? But we had this big water festival in the temple. Why? So that your rains will be blessed for the year. You'll be able to grow things throughout the fall. You'll get to grow into the spring and have a good year of growth. But then we have a weird thing right now. We get to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, a holiday that is not in the Torah, right? It just says at the beginning of the 7th month, you will celebrate a day of blasts, a day of memory, Yom Zikaron, Yom Truah, right? It doesn't say Rosh Hashanah. It doesn't say it's the start of the year anywhere in the Torah. The rabbis brought that in later in our discussion. And what do they say it's going to be? A day of talking about kingship. Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. If you know those 3 words from somewhere, from anywhere, it's when we get to the Musaf on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, and you hear the 3 major parts of Musaf, Malchuyot, kingship, Zichronot, remembrances, and Shofarot. That one should be self-explanatory, hopefully. Okay? So that you will crown me as king over you. Remembrances, the remembrance will rise before me for good. And with what will the remembrance rise? With the sound of the shofar. Here we get the idea from the rabbis telling us that Rosh Hashanah is all about enthroning God as king. Now, I think the word melech comes up a whole lot. We hear it all the time now in our liturgy, right? I mean, I just showed you in the blessings we read in the morning, every single one of them, right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. It's a common theme there, but I just showed you a whole bunch of verses from the Torah, right? About who God is. God is parent, God is lover. Did any of them say anything about king? Did any of them? I mean, I can double check, but I'm pretty sure none of them say anything about king. Might be wrong. I've been wrong before. So if you turn to the next page of your sheet, please. I'm going to give you 3 verses here. These 3 verses are all found in the Malchuyot service, okay? So for example, if you don't believe me, I wouldn't believe me, you can turn to page 306. Turn to page 306 of your Machzor, if you will, please. All right. Everybody get there yet? These are the sovereignty verses. God save the king. All right. These are the Malchuyot verses, the verses that are used. And remember, we have verses that are called out. We're supposed to use 10 verses for Malchuyot, 10 verses for Zichronot, and 10 verses for Shofarot. Okay? So they had to find 10 verses to put in here that talked about God as king. And the 3 verses they bring from the Torah, which are the first 3 verses there, they're also on your source sheet here as well, kind of cut down a little bit if this is easier to read. These are the only 3 times in the entirety of the Torah that God and king, or the root for king, melech, are used together in the same sentence. These are the only times that it's ever used in the Torah. Now, I specifically said Torah and not Tanakh. Okay, does everyone know what Tanakh means? So just for those who maybe not know, we have the giant books over there that are all the Torah books, right? We have the Red Etz Chaim here. This is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, right? It includes also the Haftarot in here as well, but that's what this is limited to. That's Torah, basically, the 5 books of Moses. Nevi'im means prophets. All the words of the prophets, right? That's where we get the Haftarot from, all the prophets, and Ketuvim is all the writings. So any of the Megillot and things like that, also the words like the Chronicles, the history books at the end there, those are all in the Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, it's an acronym, Tanakh. But these are the only 3 verses we get in the Torah where the phrase melech is used at all. So the first one comes from the Song of the Sea. When the Israelites have just crossed through the Red Sea after fleeing from the Egyptians, they cross over safely, and Moses sings his poetry. There's a million ways to sing that, of course. I probably picked the one that people don't know, unfortunately. You know it back there? Thank you. Which, by the way, is also one of the oldest pieces of the Torah. One of the oldest pieces of the Torah is the Song of the Sea, Exodus chapter 15. Almost every part in the Torah, it's actually poetry, written as poetry, tends to be the older pieces of the tradition. Again, you can hold in your heart that the Torah was all given by God at Mount Sinai. You can hold in your heart that's a variety of authors that came together, either inspired by God or just inspired by the needs of man, whatever you want to hold there. That's entirely fine. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about based on the language used there. That is one of the oldest pieces of text that was given in the entirety of the tradition. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. We also say those words every single day in part of our prayer service. In the next chapter, in Numbers 23:21, this is when the prophet Balaam is trying to curse the Israelites, right? He's paid by Balak to come to the Israelite camp to offer them a curse because apparently whenever he opens his mouth, whenever he curses people, it sticks. He's really good at his job. That's amazing. Wish I was as good at my job as he is at his job. But he gets there, God gives him these nightmares, says, don't go. Okay, you can go, but use the words I give you. He finally gets there, he sees the people of Israel, and the most famous words we have maybe in all of our tradition, said by a non-Jew, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, Israel, right? How beautiful it is to see you all camped there in front of me. Not talking about that right now, but in that same kind of cluster of curses that he's wishing upon that are really God's blessings for them, No harm is in sight for Jacob, no woe in view for Israel. Their God, Adonai, is with them, and their kings acclaim in their midst. By the way, the translation here, again, obviously always troubling. Kings acclaim, truat melech, maybe like the enunciation of their king is in their midst. It could be that they're blowing a shofar at the time here, actually. But some concept of God being a king to the people. And even here, it's not directly connected whether God is king in this verse. I know here it reads that way, but if you actually look at the Hebrew and look at the grammar there, it's not 100% clear if God is referring to, or a king is referring to God here, or some other concept of like kingliness and some kind of like they have a kingdom together here as a people. The next one is much more explicit, though. This is, again, Moses retelling the story. It's at the end of our Torah here. Then God, it doesn't actually, by the way, here again, the word God you see is inserted, right? Because it says, like, based on the contextual analysis of this, they're probably talking about God here, but maybe not 100% for sure. God became king in Yeshurun when the heads of the people assembled, the tribes of Israel together. And again, this concept of king here doesn't mean like king with a crown either, right? There's some idea of like their leader of the people when they're gathered together and assembled is God. They give God the blessings of king, but it doesn't necessarily mean that God is king in any real sense here. Okay? So that's where our Torah leaves us. Those are the only 3 times God and king are mentioned in the same verse. There's lots of other kings that are mentioned. Like they didn't forget the word for king. We fight a lot of kings, deal with a lot of kings. Abraham has the battle of 5 kings, right, in his journey to save Lot. And yet God and king are never mentioned together in a big way. Because, I want to look at this next paragraph here. This is interesting. We actually just read this this past week. And this is the concept of when you desire to have a king over you when you get into the land, what should that king do? And the short answer of it is, not a whole lot. The Torah really doesn't like kings. It thinks kings are terrible for the people. The people end up begging for a king in the book of Samuel, right? That's how we get Shaul appointed above us. We say, please make us like everyone else. Please give us a king. Make us like any other nation. But this is the words of Moses, right? I'm on Deuteronomy 17, 14 to 20. It should be somewhere at the bottom of the page. I don't have page numbers. I really apologize for that. I made a mistake. Next time, I'll remind me page numbers. If after you have entered the land that your God Adonai has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, so here, this is always a question the rabbis ask, is this an actual thing you must do or something you can choose to do? Do you need a king? Or can you just say, we kind of like this idea of a king. Let's have a king. I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. You shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by your God Adonai. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. There's a requirement, right? You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kin. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. God's not supposed to be a wealthy person. The king is not supposed to be wealthy. He's not supposed to amass all these goods, right? You see all the gluttonous kings of all the kingdoms around us. That's not what we need from a king. That's not what our king's supposed to do. You must not go back that way again, back to Egypt. He shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. By the way, all of these things are things that our kings actually ended up doing, which is a big problem. We were warned against it, and it happened anyway. Talk about a premonition here, right? Coming true. When he is seated on the royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. The king doesn't make the rules. The king has no actual power here. Let it remain with him and let him read in it all of his life so that he may learn to revere his God, Hashem, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left. The king has no actual power here. He can't have a lot of stuff, right? Can't have horses, can't have gold, can't have silver, can't keep a harem, and he has no political power. He is beholden to the word of God. And who's the keeper of the word of God? The priests in the temple. In this image of what Israel should look like, the religious figures have all the power. The political figures have no power. It's God as a figurehead. The Torah really does not like the concept of Israel having a God. It's kind of throwing a bone to them, saying, if you really need this because everyone else has one and you get jealous, grass is greener on that side, right? We'll give you a king, but he's going to have no power whatsoever. He's just going to sit on that throne and look pretty for you guys. Okay? Which, by the way, if in modern days the priests or their descendants held the power, I'd be making the rules, but I don't make any rules around here, so I'm sorry. It's not that way anymore. But we have this amazing idea that kings really aren't a good thing, and yet, all throughout the high holidays, what are we going to say? God is king. Look at the very next line here. The very next line here. This is like the classic opening line of the prayer service. Everyone does the same thing. You mumble through the opening prayers, right? Maybe a line said out loud every now and then. And this is the moment where the chazan comes to the stage, right? Gets really big voice in their chest, right? A big breath of air, and declares, HaMelech Yoshev al Kiseh Ram V'Nisa. We are here to enthrone God as king today. That's what we're coming here together to do. This phrase is used every single week on Shabbos, right? It's usually the last thing that's said before we start actual service of Shacharit, right? In the Sukkot Zimmer portion of it. But here it's the portion where we decided we are going to start with this as the big opening phrase. That very first word, HaMelech, is often drawn out by Chazanim, just making it very, very melodic and beautiful, and imagining this idea of a God raised on a throne up high. I'm not even going to try it tonight because I cannot do it whatsoever. I can't do it justice. But this is that very opening moment. We say, HaMelech. God is here in the room. Let's get started. We got a lot of work to do today, but all dedicated to God. And it's a really powerful moment. But again, this idea of God as king just still feels like a really weird notion. Kings are terrible. Why do we want a king? But then we have my favorite prayer of the high holidays, I think. Avinu Malkeinu. Now this one everyone here should have some familiarity with, I hope. You've heard it before in some capacity, in some context. So I'm going to ask, if you still have mic handy, I'm going to ask you guys I'm going to poll the audience here. What's that show? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Ask the audience. Why the heck would we need to pair Avinu with Malkeinu? What are those two things even just doing together? I know I'm asking you a very deep question, very deep theological question right now, but if anybody has any response they want to offer now of why we're pairing together the idea of Avinu and Malkeinu. I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts. Wait, here's the microphone. Okay.
Out of breath? Kings in the ancient days and all the way until the 1700s were the military leaders, not just all powerful. They were the military leaders. That's why we wanted a king. Father is for the moral and for that. So we have the moral vision and the power vision to protect us.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think also Father loves his children, but a king is powerful enough to do whatever he wants. So I think the concept is God loves you, but yet be careful because God can be, watching over you and for good or bad depending how you behave. So that's the concept of two things in one word, Avinu Malkeinu, and two words, Avinu Malkeinu.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I think I've weighted myself towards this side of the room. I apologize. There was a study done years and years ago. I learned about it in psychology class in college I didn't pay attention to, in which whichever side of the room the teacher tended to face more, got higher grades than the other side of the room. It doesn't matter how they ordered the students. They could shuffle them after one test, and those who were seated over here, now seated over here, got lower grades than the people over here. I apologize if I'm ignoring this kind of side over here. But all the answers coming from over here right now. I'll make sure everyone gets their voice heard over here if they want to. Right. But I'm going to push back on that for a second, David, if I could. I'm going to push back on you for just 1 second. Okay. So Avinu, a parent as the moral compass, and Malkeinu as the power figure, the projection of power. And yet, honestly, the love of a parent for a child can cloud their judgment. Think about all the times you hear about parents protecting their kids even when they've done terrible things, and the king being the impartial seat of power to judge them fairly and to guide the people from right from wrong based on the letter of the law.
I don't think that's, it doesn't say our Father, our Judge.
Wait, say that again. It doesn't say.
It doesn't say, our Father, our Judge. It says, our Father, our King. The power. The King is the power. And the limitations that you talked about before are to make sure that it stays as a military leader.
Nice, perfect. Yeah, so I think it's a beautiful pairing of kind of those two opposing forces. If you've ever studied Chassidut, I'm looking at you now, Genevieve, right? There's always this idea of chesed and din. Chesed is the untranslatable word that the King James Bible gave us loving kindness. I still don't know what that word actually means. Someone can explain to me, that'd be great. But some idea of like ultimate, all-encompassing love and care and kindness, right? And din, which literally means law or judgment, right? Dayan is a judge, din is judgment or law. So it's just two opposing forces of chesed and din, always constantly in battle, the tug of war pulling at ourselves to see which way you're going to follow, right? And Avinu Malkeinu, the same kind of concept of chesed and din. But then the question becomes which is which to a certain extent too. Which a parent can also be. I'll talk about this personally. I didn't know if I was to say this tonight, but like personally, when I think of Avinu, or Avi, well, not Avi me, but Avi, like my father, I have a terrible relationship with my father. I'll be honest. So that part of it is really hard for me to see and say, I'm praying to someone who's supposed to be like a father figure to me when I've had trouble with my father in the past, a lot of trouble with my father. And so maybe I like the idea of having the fair, impartial, balanced king that's removed from all the riffraff of day-to-day life. And yet, I always know I have that embrace from parent too. And it's the balancing act of going back and forth between those two polar opposites. The strictness and the love, the care and the comfort, and also the judgment and the punishment, right? All those things together. Now, I do want to look at God as judge now, though, for a second here too, since we're talking about that. Is it in here or is it somewhere else? Yeah, here's what I do. Okay, so you have a huge chunk of English text here that says Unatana Tokef. Everybody hopefully sees that in your source sheet here. Mine's a lot of order, but that's fine. Put that there, put that here. All right, we're not going to read through any of this right now, the first part of the English here, but this is the story of where Unatana Tokef came from. Okay, it's the background and history of how it was created, how it became part of our liturgy. I included this here because it's always a fun thing. Okay, it's hard to say fun when talking about Unatana Tokef, but as fun and enjoyable and meaningful as it can be, something for you to read at home if you want to later. I highly encourage you to go through that because it is one of the most fascinating parts of our tradition. It's also one of the most difficult pieces of our tradition as well. Rabbi Feinstein has a rule when you start at Ziegler, which is, well, there's two rules. The first rule is if you start a sermon with the word so, he will take off his shoe and throw it at you. Okay? That's happened to me before. It's come right on behind the ear, was great. The other one is in your first 10 years on the pulpit, there's two things you do not talk about. You don't try to give an explanation for Unatana Tokef, and you don't give an explanation for the Akedah. Okay? So day 2 of Rosh Hashanah this year, by the way, look for me to give the Torah introduction to the Akedah and break that rule. Hopefully I'll have some fun insight for you there. But this is an absolutely amazing part of tradition that we should look at and grapple with. And so I want to kind of go into detail on it just a little bit, where it says, Unatana Tokef, let us describe the great holiness of this day. Do you guys see that part of our text here? It's just past all the paragraphs of English. It's where we start to have the text in Hebrew and English side by side again. Everyone sees that? Okay, because the rest of our source sheet is basically just this one prayer. We'll talk about that a little bit, finish up a little bit more of the Amidah, time for questions, time to go for a drink, whatever you guys want to do. I'll do anything, okay? Let's describe the great holiness of this day, for it is awesome and frightening. Frightening, awe-inspiring. That word, by the way, gets used both ways. The verb yirah, it means both awesome and fear-inspiring. There's no way to really describe what those emotions are, so it kind of comes out as fear a lot of the time, when it really should be awe-inspiring. On this day, your kingship is uplifted, right? Uvotinase malchutecha, right? This is the day we inspire your kingship, and your throne is established with kindness, and you sit upon it in truth. Okay? So true that you are judge, you are admonisher, knower and witness. You inscribe, seal, record, and count, and recall all forgotten things. What were the 3 parts of our Musaf Amidah service we talked about earlier? This is not a pop quiz. But we had Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot. So we talked about Malchuyot a little bit to start with right now. And this, we're getting back to the idea of zichronot. Why do we have zichronot in there? It's kind of the odd one out. It really doesn't make sense here unless you think of it as going the two of them paired together, which is this is the God sitting in judgment as the king, as the judge, and we're asking you to remember all of our deeds. But not just remember all of our deeds, remember all of your deeds. Because God, you're the one who drove us to do these things. You're the one who gave us opportunities, gave us chances, gave us free will. Don't blame it all on us. You're partners in this, God. So you recall, you recount all the things that were forgotten, all the things we did over the past year. You open the book again and read from it, and every person must take account for what they've done. And then what do we have? A great shofar is sounded. We have shofarot, and the angels are alarmed. Don't forget, in this whole process, you're not trying to rise up to the level of the angels, because the angels too have to call up to account for what they've done wrong over the past year. Tshuva is a process. I'm not sure if Rabbi Feinstein mentioned this last week. Hopefully he did. Tshuva is a process that happens for everyone up to the level of God. Even some tradition holds that God himself must do, when I say himself, I just mean God, must do tshuva as well for the things that God maybe got wrong over the past year. There's no person that is above the law. There's no one exempt from the process of tshuva here. So God is king. God is sitting in judgment over all the people. But then, all of mankind pass before you like young sheep. That's the very last line on that page, the start of the next page there. God is shepherd. This, by the way, comes in really, really big in a different tradition, different faith that starts with a big, well, not starts with the, starts with a T, but that's not the faith name. Down the road, right? They take God as shepherd incredibly literally, and we are the flock that flocks to the shepherd. And yet, what does the shepherd do? Make sure no one gets lost. Make sure everyone is there, everyone is cared for. But at the same time, God as shepherd, the shepherd thins the herd. The shepherd says things that must be removed, right? That's part of why this prayer is so challenging, because the shepherd has to do the job of saying what is right, what is wrong, who will go on, whose path ends right here, as we read in the whole next paragraph, right? Who will live, who will die, either in their time, not in their time. How will they die? Will it be terrible? Will it be pleasant, as much as like restful as it can be? Who will have a chance at life anew? Who will have success in the coming year? And who will not see any of that to come? So all these images of God come together in this paragraph here, this prayer here, of God as king, God as our parent, keep saying it's in judgment on us, God as the judge, God as the redeemer, God as the shepherd of the herd, all these images that come together. And the answer comes down to what we can do, right? Utshuva, utzvila, utzedakah. Repentance, prayer, and charity. These are the things that we do to kind of redeem ourselves in the eyes of God, right? And to redeem ourselves in our relationship with the world, with each other, and with God. And so the question I have now is, where the heck does that leave us? We've just gone through a whole lot of text from the good book, from the new book, from all the books, from all the people. Where the heck does that leave us? Who is the God of the high holidays? Who are we praying to? Who are we praying with? Who are we praying for? What are we asking for? And the answer is, unsurprisingly in Jewish tradition, yes. The answer is yes, because this is a day that is so important to us, that is so elevated for us, that is so deeply meaningful for us. The answer is yes, because everyone has to find a way into the tradition here. This is the day, one time a year, and the rabbis knew it back then 2,000 years ago. They didn't have tickets, but they still had the same concept of, this is the one day a year when everyone knows we have to come together, when everyone knows we have to get on the same page as far as what the year ahead is going to look like. And so everyone has to find a way into the tradition. And so the answer is, who is the God of the high holidays? It's whoever you bring into the room with you. As I kind of said, I think you may have seen my communal email that went out yesterday, right? Know before who you are standing, right? That's not just saying recognize who is out there in tradition that is standing before you when you're talking to God, but who are you bringing that conversation? It's putting the mirror up in front of you and saying, what am I bringing into this relationship? What am I bringing to this conversation? What do I need this year? That's the God I'm going to talk to for the high holidays. That's the God I'm going to connect with. That's the God that we're going to have in the room with us on that time. Whether you believe in God as king, whether you believe in God as judge, as shepherd, God as parent, God as lover, any of those things, all of those things, whether you believe in God at all. Still, we still come. There's plenty of people in this room, I'm sure, who would say, "Of course, there's no God. Are you kidding me?" And don't forget, we do the prayer that says, in the Hineni it says, "Let me pray with all those in this room who don't believe in God, who sin, who don't follow all the rules, don't do any of this stuff," right? We know we're all in the room together. We know we all come into the room together, and we're all in the space with God together. So I'm sorry that was like a really not satisfying conclusion to it. But the answer is, that's why we have such a rich tradition around the high holidays and around all these metaphors for God, because we just need to find ourselves in one of these places. We just have time for questions here as well. We'll do that here in a minute. But I want to tell you one last story that comes to us from Rabbi Shmuel Zalman, the first Rebbe of Chabad, the one who founded Chabad, okay? The Alter Rebbe, that's what I'm trying to say, the Alter Rebbe. He says, Elul is a time of paradox. This month we're in is a time of paradox. Because this is when we start talking about the idea of doing spiritual work, right? This is a time of deep, deep effort for us. And normally, when we talk about spiritual work, we're talking about things that are Kodesh, right? Yom Tov, all these holidays we have coming up, right? We typically say that there's times that are holy, times that are not. This whole month is holy, but it's not one big holiday, right? We go about our daily business. We go about and do the mundane things of life. We're trying to engage spiritually, and at the same time, we have to make sure that we still have a chance to redeem ourselves for the coming year. So the whole month comes like this weird in-between period of not quite holy, not quite mundane, somewhere in between. But this month gets incredibly, incredibly special. Because here's what happens. This is the month our tradition tells us that we talk about those 13 attributes of God, right? This is the month they're supposed to be revealed to us. In the Torah, in the tradition, they say this is the month of time, in Elul, right before Shana, is when they're revealed to us. And yet, what do we know about a king? A king lives in a palace, behind a wall, behind guards, maybe behind a moat, far removed from us. And so how do we compare these things together? How do we see God as this merciful, just figure, and yet God, as king, might be far removed from us? So he said, what happens in this month is God, everyone wants to see God, doesn't have to go to the palace, doesn't have to pass the guards, pass through the gate, get into the palace, get past all the security. God comes out to greet us. God comes out to show us this month who God is, the relationship that we have, to not be so distant, to start to grow closer together as we get ready for the new year. And so the term used is God is in the field. In the month of Elul, God has come out from behind the walls. God has come into the field where the people are, the people that he loves, the people that he cares for, the people that he treasures. That's us. We are those people. And we feel God's presence in a new way, even as we go about our mundane, everyday existence. Hopefully it's not so mundane. Hopefully you're doing some fun things. We get the idea, right? So this month of Elul, may it be a blessing that you really, truly feel that God is in the field, that God is here with us, and God is helping us get ready for a brand new year, starting in 3 weeks. And with that, I'll say, do we have any questions tonight? I love questions. I love questions. I love questions I can answer best.
If there's questions.
I think that we created God because we want there to be a God. And when you said God is in the temple, it's because we want God to be in the temple. And that's where he is. I feel that God is with us right now because it's the God that I believe in. But I think that we created God because we want there to be a God.
Yeah. So there's it's Abraham Joshua Heschel's book, right? God in Search of Man, and then there's a response book that someone wrote, which is Man in Search of God, right? Which is the idea of, is God, are we the creation of God, or is God the creation of mankind? It goes both ways. I think we have to attribute to God things that we want to see in ourselves as well. It's a huge part of it. So yeah, we're here together because we want to feel God amongst ourselves right now, amongst our community, being together. Absolutely. Oh, Jay has a question. You threatened to ask me an unanswerable question tonight. I'm waiting for that unanswerable question.
Well, this may be it. One of the other things I learned that was very memorable for me in my young adult days at Aish Torah for the high holidays is pretty much what you just said, but they said it in a way which I want to know if you agree this is the same thing. They said that God is closer to us. Of course, they believe, unlike certain people, that there is a God as an entity rather than in our minds or in our hearts. So assuming that God is an entity, they say God is closer and closer to us during the entire period of, yeah, and that at the end of Yom Kippur, at the very end when you say Adonai Hu Elohim, these 7 times, Adonai Hu Elohim, God is slowly then going back to, as you gave the metaphor as a king, going back distant from you. Is that
the blocking of the gates, right? That's the image of
right? Is that the same thing you were saying in a different way?
Yep.
In other words,
I will tell you something funny about this. Does everyone know what the Mir Yeshiva is in Jerusalem? It's like one of the biggest yeshivas. It's 5,000 to 10,000 students in the heart of Mea Shearim or adjacent to it. One of those, like you think of yeshiva in your mind with like thousands of kids sitting at these stenders yelling at each other at full volume all day. That's what the Mir Yeshiva is. Like one of the most religious places on earth, as far as observance goes, not necessarily religiosity. It's a different issue. But I heard one of them analogize this to the hole in the ozone layer. They said, we're getting good at prayer because the hole in the ozone layer was growing and growing and growing, and so that meant God was getting closer to us. He literally meant, this is not even a joke, it's not a metaphor, this is literal. He thought the hole in the ozone layer meant that God could be closer to us, and when the people became modernized and we went away from loving God, went away from our tradition, that's when the hole in the ozone layer started to get repaired by itself, because we were getting further away from God.
Because they don't study science.
Right? He literally thought like that's the way the world was reacting to the religiosity of Jews all around the world was through the ozone. So we talk about that same in there. Like God is closer this month. The barrier between us and God is thinner. There's some way to get closer to Him. Some people believe that's actually a real physical manifestation in the world too.
So they believe that God is trying to kill us then. I mean, it's the hole in the ozone layer, which is slowly.
God gave us sunscreen too. Question over here.
God is the one whom we believe He is. He is one, but we see different facets of God.
Beautiful, yeah. Again, whatever you bring to the conversation is what it is. What it is at the end of the day. It's funny. I kind of didn't even mention this, but if you look at the Malchiyot verses there, I forgot to mention this. The first, I said there's only 3 verses that say, right, God is king. We went through all 3 of those verses very closely, right? And so at the end it says, and thus it is written in the Torah, which would be the ultimate, this is what declares God to be king. And you know what it says? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Doesn't sound kingly to me at all, but they ran out of justification for declaring God as king in this ancient ceremony. That, by the way, there are historians that think this was a literal ceremony every Rosh Hashanah, that we reenacted the actual enthronement of God as king, which is why we blow shofar, which is why we read the verses of kingship, which is why there's all this imagery of God as king, is that it was a literal part of the festival observance, was to have a mock enthronement of God as king every single year. Should we do that here? Should we parade in the crown and everything? No, that was a very quick no. Any other questions, anybody? Comments, concerns, ideas, expressions? Complaints go to Alana, not to me, but otherwise I'll take everything else.
Thank you.
I said, thank you guys. Thank you.